Deep within the untamed Amazon, 3 archaeologists stumble upon what shouldn't exist. A massive stone door embedded in a forgotten cliffside. Ancient symbols crawl across its surface, pulsating with an unnatural rhythm. Dr. James Harlow approaches cautiously, placing his weathered palm against the cool stone. The vibration intensifies, synchronizing with the unmistakable sound emanating from within. A heartbeat, slow and deliberate, as though something ancient sleeps just beyond the threshold. The jungle falls silent as recording equipment captures what science cannot explain. What ancient power could create something that remains alive after thousands of years? What happens when curiosity pushes men to open what was sealed for humanity's protection? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story intrigues you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The humid air clung to Dr. James Harlow's skin as he pushed aside a curtain of vines. At 65, his weathered face had earned every line, each one a testament to decades chasing history's shadows across the world's most inhospitable regions. Behind him, Dr. Marcus Reynolds adjusted his glasses, the linguist's methodical nature evident in every deliberate movement. Dr. Thomas Vega brought up the rear, the anthropologist's eyes constantly scanning the canopy above. 3 weeks of hacking through this green hell better be worth it. James, Reynolds said, swatting at insects that seemed particularly drawn to his salt and pepper beard. Harlow merely nodded, consulting the worn GPS unit. According to Matteo, we're less than 2 kilometers from the coordinates. Their guide, Matteo, moved silently ahead, machete parting the undergrowth with practiced efficiency. The indigenous man had agreed to lead them this far, though his reluctance grew with each passing day. "The place you seek," Matteo said, voice barely above a whisper. "My people do not go there. The forest has teeth in that place." Vega exchanged glances with Reynolds. They'd both noticed how wildlife grew scarce as they ventured deeper into this uncharted region. No birds called. No monkeys chattered. Even the insects had thinned out, leaving an unnatural silence hanging between the ancient trees. "James," Vega called, kneeling suddenly beside a rotting tree trunk. "You should see this." Harlow doubled back, breath catching as Vega held up a charred figurine, its features partially melted yet still recognizable. A humanoid figure with multiple limbs and a face that appeared to have both animal and plant-like characteristics. "Tribal artwork?" Reynolds asked, joining them. Vega shook his head. "Not from any indigenous culture I recognize. And look at the material. It's not clay or wood." Harlow took the statue, turning it over carefully. "The melting pattern suggests extreme heat, yet there's no evidence of a fire large enough to cause this." "There is more," Matteo said from several meters ahead, his voice uncharacteristically tense. Following him through a dense patch of ferns, they emerged into a small clearing. What remained of a camp lay scattered before them: tattered canvas, rusted equipment, and a fallen satellite dish, all seemingly abandoned years ago. Harlow moved methodically through the site, examining dated equipment that placed the camp in the 1940s. In a waterproof case, miraculously preserved beneath a collapsed tent, he found a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with increasingly frantic entries. "Reynolds," Harlow called. "You need to see this." The linguist took the journal, scanning the faded text. "The handwriting deteriorates throughout. Listen to this final entry. The heartbeat grows louder. Mendoza believes we've found it, the living door. God help us if he's right." Vega looked up from examining bone fragments partially embedded in the soil. "These remains, they're human, but there's something wrong with them." "Wrong how?" Harlow asked. "The bone density is off, and there are unusual growth patterns I've never seen in human remains." As night fell, they established camp near the abandoned site, the satellite phone connecting them briefly with Dr. Sarah Chen at the university. "The Nexus Foundation is expecting your first report tomorrow." Chen's voice crackled through static. "They're particularly interested in any unusual biological samples." "Tell them we're close," Harlow replied, not mentioning the statue or remains. Some instinct warned him to keep those findings private, at least for now. That night, each man dreamed the same dream, symbols flowing like water across stone, pulsing in rhythm with something vast and ancient. They awoke simultaneously at dawn, each man drenched in sweat despite the cool morning air. Reynolds was the first to speak. "I saw symbols in my dream. Symbols I've never seen before, yet somehow recognized. Like they were already in your head," Vega added, "waiting to be remembered." Harlow said nothing, but his hand unconsciously clutched the charred statue, now wrapped in cloth in his pack. The morning light revealed what they had missed in yesterday's fading sun. The statue's multiple limbs were positioned in a pattern identical to symbols each man had dreamed. Matteo approached, fear evident in his usually stoic expression. "The forest has shown you its memories. Now it knows you are here." Ahead, through a gap in the towering trees, a sheer rock face rose impossibly high, its surface unnaturally smooth against the chaotic jungle backdrop. Dawn broke through the canopy in fragmented shafts of light as the team stood before the massive stone door embedded in the cliff face. In the morning light, its true scale became apparent, nearly 30 feet tall and half as wide, with a perfectly smooth surface that seemed to absorb the jungle's ambient sounds. "I've never seen stone like this," Harlow murmured, running his hand over the surface. The material felt cool despite the rising humidity, with a subtle vibration that seemed to match his own pulse. Reynolds unpacked his equipment methodically, setting up high-resolution cameras to document the countless symbols etched across the door's surface. "These markings aren't random. There's structure here, possibly linguistic." Vega watched as Matteo maintained a respectful distance, the guide's eyes never leaving the door. "Matteo, does your tribe have stories about this place?" The guide nodded slowly. "The elders speak of the place where the jungle has a heart, where the old ones sleep beneath the stone." While Reynolds began preliminary documentation of the symbols, Harlow unpacked a sleek metallic case bearing the Nexus Foundation logo. Inside lay a device unlike their standard archaeological equipment, a prototype quantum resonance scanner, allegedly designed to analyze material composition at the subatomic level. When exactly did Nexus provide that? Vega asked, eyebrow raised. "It was added to our equipment list last minute," Harlow replied, avoiding eye contact as he calibrated the device. "Standard procedure for unexplored sites." "Nothing standard about that technology," Reynolds muttered, but returned to his work. The scanner emitted a soft hum as Harlow passed it over the door's surface. Its display flickered, with rapidly changing numbers and patterns that made little sense even to him. Suddenly the device emitted a sharp tone, its screen filling with error messages. "What happened?" Vega asked, joining him. Harlow shook his head. "According to these readings, parts of this structure don't fully exist in our space-time. The quantum signature is fluctuating." "That's impossible," Reynolds said, looking up from his notes. "So is a heartbeat coming from solid stone," Harlow countered. "They worked through the morning, establishing a perimeter of sensors to record the door's pulsations. By midday, Reynolds had filled 3 notebooks with partial symbol transcriptions. "The patterns have similarities to Proto-Andean script, but the structure is unlike anything I've documented," he explained, pointing to recurring symbols. "These groupings appear regularly, possibly representing a warning or instruction. Can you translate any of it?" Vega asked. Reynolds pointed to a sequence near the center of the door. "This section references something like the heartbeat of the world and guardians of the threshold, but I need more time." Harlow, meanwhile, had secretly extracted samples from the door using specialized equipment, minute scrapings of the material stored in sealed containers. The quantum scanner's readings troubled him more than he admitted to the others. According to the device, the door's composition changed when observed directly versus through instruments. "The beating pattern," Vega said, reviewing their audio recordings, "it's exactly 65 beats per minute, the average human resting heart rate." As afternoon faded to evening, they compared morning photographs with new images, making a disturbing discovery. "The symbols have shifted," Reynolds said, disbelief evident in his voice as he overlaid the images, not dramatically but unmistakably, like they're slowly rotating around central points. Harlow's satellite phone chimed, Dr. Chen requesting their daily update. He stepped away from the door, describing their findings in carefully chosen words, omitting mentions of the quantum scanner's anomalous readings and the moving symbols. The Foundation will be pleased with your initial findings, Chen replied, her voice partially obscured by increasing static. They're particularly interested in any unusual properties of the structure's material. After disconnecting, Harlow turned to find Vega watching him intently. You didn't tell her everything, Vega observed. Some findings require verification before reporting, Harlow replied with practiced ease. As night fell, they established camp 20 meters from the door, the rhythmic thudding now impossible to ignore as it synchronized with their heartbeats. In the darkness, none of them mentioned how the sound seemed to be gradually increasing in volume, or how the quantum scanner continued to emit soft alerts throughout the night. Its display showing readings that, according to known physics, should be impossible morning brought visitors. Mateo had left before first light, returning hours later with 2 tribal elders whose weathered faces bore intricate tattoos in patterns that echoed the door's symbols. The elders, a man introduced as Kuyai and a woman named Naira, observed the archaeological team's camp with wary eyes. They have agreed to speak of what they know, Mateo explained, but they will not approach the Heartstone. Dr. Vega, as the anthropologist, led the conversation while Reynolds recorded and translated. Harlow watched impatiently, more interested in resuming work on the door than in what he considered local superstitions. Kuyai removed a ceremonial pipe from a woven bag, holding it reverently. The pipe's surface featured carvings remarkably similar to symbols on the door. This has been with our people since the before time, Naira said in her native tongue, which Vega translated for the others. When the Star Walkers came and planted their seeds in our world, Reynolds leaned forward, examining the pipe without touching it. The craftsmanship matches nothing in the archaeological record. The symbols here, he pointed to a specific pattern, are identical to those on the central section of the door. Kuyai spoke in a measured cadence as he packed the pipe with dried leaves from a separate pouch. When the shamans smoke the sacred plants, they can hear the voice of the forest. It warns of those who sleep beneath the stone, those who came from beyond the stars, Naira added. The ancients sealed them away when they learned what would happen if the sleepers awakened before their time. Vega took careful notes. And what would happen? The elders exchanged glances before Kuyai answered. The unmaking of what is, to make way for what they desire. Harlow could no longer contain his scientific skepticism. With all due respect to your traditions, we're dealing with an archaeological find, not sleeping star people, Mateo translated, and Naira's expression hardened. The stone breathes. Does your science explain this, old man? Before Harlow could respond, Kuyai lit the pipe, inhaling deeply. The smoke he exhaled didn't disperse normally, but formed coherent shapes, patterns that unmistakably resembled the door's symbols before dissolving. The forest itself grew to guard the door, Naira continued. It watches, it waits, it protects us from what sleeps beneath. Reynolds, initially skeptical, now looked troubled. The indigenous stories aligned too precisely with the partial translations to be coincidence. They're describing guardians and entities sealed away, the same concepts in the door's text. Kuyai stood suddenly, walking to the perimeter of their camp. With deliberate movements he began a ritual, placing small objects, stones, feathers, and twisted plant fibers, in specific arrangements. Naira joined him on the opposite side, mirroring his actions. What are they doing? Harlow asked. Creating a boundary, Mateo explained. Protection against what may come if you continue disturbing the Heartstone. When the ritual was complete, Kuyai approached each team member, offering the pipe. Those who carry the forest's blessing may be spared when the Watchers come. Reynolds and Vega each accepted, taking symbolic puffs. When Kuyai reached Harlow, the archaeologist declined with a dismissive wave. "I'll trust in science rather than smoke, thank you." The elder's eyes narrowed, but he nodded as if expecting this response. "The door knows your heartbeat now. It has tasted your dreams. Be careful what you awaken, for some things cannot be returned to sleep." As the elders prepared to leave, strange clouds began forming directly overhead, unnatural spiraling patterns despite the absence of wind. A distant rumble of thunder punctuated Nera's final warning. "The jungle has a heart, and you stand before it. When it beats faster, the guardians will wake." After their departure, an uncomfortable silence fell over the camp. Even Harlow seemed subdued by the precision of their knowledge about the door. "We should consider the possibility," Reynolds finally said, "that the indigenous accounts contain valuable information." Vega nodded, looking toward the door. "Those symbols on the pipe couldn't be coincidence. Their people have been keeping watch over this place for generations." Harlow's satellite phone buzzed, breaking the tension. The display showed a message from an unexpected source. "Richard Kane, executive director of the Nexus Foundation." "Interesting timing," Vega remarked. "Indeed," Harlow murmured, staring at the message with a troubled expression. "Especially since I never gave Caney this number." The satellite phone's display glowed in the dimming light as Harlow stepped away from camp to take the call. Richard Kane's voice came through with unsettling clarity despite their remote location. "Dr. Harlow, congratulations on finding our door." Harlow tensed at the phrasing. "Our door?" "Figure of speech," Caney replied smoothly. "Nexus is merely facilitating your groundbreaking research, as always." Thunder rumbled overhead as unnatural cloud formations continued to spiral above the site. Harlow glanced back toward the camp where Reynolds and Vega were reviewing the day's findings, unaware of this conversation. "Your preliminary samples arrived at our lab this morning," Caney continued. "Remarkable material properties, unlike anything we've catalogued before." "How?" Harlow demanded. "I only collected those samples yesterday. Physical transport would take. Nexus has resources beyond academia, Doctor. We need daily DNA analysis of any biological material found near the door. The encryption protocols in your equipment will handle secure transmission." The mention of specialized equipment triggered a memory. The sealed case Nexus had added to his gear last minute with strict instructions not to open it until reaching the site. Harlow had assumed it contained additional scanning tools. "I don't recall DNA sequencing being part of our research parameters," Harlow said carefully. Kane's laugh held no warmth. "Come now, James. We both know why Nexus funded your expedition when every academic institution rejected your theories about pre-human architecture in the Amazon." Harlow's mind flashed back to that first meeting at Nexus headquarters, how they'd approached him after his humiliating dismissal from the university, offering unlimited funding when his career seemed finished. "You knew about the door before I found it," Harlow realized. "We had indicators," Caney admitted. "Satellite anomalies, indigenous reports, previous expeditions that vanished. But we needed your expertise to confirm its existence and nature." After ending the call, Harlow returned to find Vega examining their equipment cases with newfound suspicion. "Find something interesting?" Harlow asked, keeping his tone neutral. Vega held up a small device with the Nexus logo. "Military-grade surveillance module hidden in our comms equipment. And this," he pointed to an innocuous-looking headset, "isn't standard EEG equipment. The sensors are configured for deep brain monitoring during sleep states." Reynolds joined them, his expression grim. "I've been analyzing our equipment manifest against what we actually received. Nearly 40% of our gear isn't standard archaeological equipment." "James," Vega said quietly, "what exactly does Nexus want from this expedition?" Before Harlow could formulate a response, Reynolds spoke again. "I've been reviewing satellite imagery provided by Nexus. The chronological metadata doesn't match up. These images of the region," he spread several printouts on the table, "were taken 6 months before you even proposed this expedition." The implications hung heavy in the air. Harlow finally broke the silence. Nexus approached me after my paper on theoretical pre-human architecture was rejected. They offered funding when no one else would touch my research. They used you to find what they already suspected was here, Vega concluded. Harlow nodded reluctantly. Caney just confirmed they've received the samples I collected. Somehow they've transported and analyzed them already. Reynolds spread the satellite images chronologically. These show something else disturbing. The clearing around the door has been expanding consistently for months. The images confirmed it. A perfectly circular area of dying vegetation centered on the door, growing larger with each image. The jungle is dying around it, Vega said. Or retreating, Reynolds suggested. Harlow reluctantly removed the neural interface headset from its case. Nexus included this in our equipment. It's designed to monitor brain activity during sleep, specifically near the door. You've been recording our dreams. Vega asked, incredulous. Not yet, Harlow admitted. But that appears to be what they want. As night fell, they made a disturbing discovery while checking the site perimeter. The protective arrangements left by the tribal elders had been subtly disturbed, moved precisely 1 centimeter outward in a perfect circle. Could be animals, Harlow suggested without conviction. No, Reynolds said, measuring the distances. This is mathematically precise. And look, he pointed to the ground. No footprints or disturbances in the soil. In the darkness beyond their camp lights, the jungle had fallen completely silent. The only sound was the door's heartbeat, now audible even from 30 meters away, its rhythm slightly faster than it had been that morning. Dawn's first light revealed the vegetation circle had expanded further overnight, now 30 meters in diameter with the door at its center, perfect in its circumference, as though drawn with an invisible compass. Reynolds had barely slept, his notebook spread across the makeshift desk as he searched for patterns in the door's symbols. After 3 days of intense analysis, something had clicked in his understanding. It's not just a language, he announced, as Harlow and Vega joined him with their morning coffee. It's an interface. He pointed to a recurring pattern of symbols near the center of the door. These groupings appear in a mathematical sequence. They're not just telling us something, they're asking for a response, like a lock mechanism. Vega suggested, more complex, Reynolds replied. I believe certain symbols are meant to be activated in sequence. Harlow frowned. Activated how? Touch, Reynolds said simply. The symbols react to physical contact. I tested a small section yesterday evening. Without waiting for approval, Reynolds approached the door, pressing his palm against a specific symbol. The stone remained inert until he traced a connecting line to another symbol. As his finger completed the pattern, a soft blue luminescence spread along the traced path. My God, Harlow whispered. Reynolds continued, following a sequence he'd identified in his notes. With each completed connection, more symbols illuminated with bioluminescent blue light, spreading outward like a living circuit. It's responding to your touch specifically, Vega observed, recording the phenomenon. The pattern is following your unique bioelectric field. Emboldened, Reynolds completed a final connection. The illuminated symbols pulsed once in unison, and the door's heartbeat rhythm changed, becoming more complex, with secondary beats between the primary rhythm. Audio analysis, Harlow ordered, and Vega quickly set up their recording equipment. When slowed to quarter speed, the modified heartbeat revealed something astonishing. Embedded within the rhythm were patterns that resembled speech. It's communicating, Reynolds said, his voice barely above a whisper. Or it's a defense mechanism, Vega countered, pointing to their equipment. The quantum scanner is detecting energy buildup within the door's structure. Mateo, who had been observing from a distance, approached with obvious reluctance. I cannot stay. The animals have all gone. When the forest empties, death follows. We're on the verge of contact, Harlow insisted. We can't leave now. I must warn my people, Mateo said, gathering his few belongings. The jungle speaks of watchers awakening. After the guide's departure, Reynolds continued his work, painstakingly documenting how different symbol combinations altered the door's response. By mid-afternoon, he had created a rudimentary translation matrix, a physical arrangement of symbols on paper that, when activated in sequence, produced predictable responses from the door. "I believe I've identified the initial unlock sequence," he announced, indicating a complex pattern that spiraled inward toward the center of the door. Based on the symbol structure, this should activate the first stage of whatever mechanism controls the door. Harlow hesitated, scientific caution warring with his desire for discovery. The indigenous warnings were quite specific about the dangers of opening it. "We're not opening it," Reynolds clarified, "just establishing communication. The sequence ends with this terminal symbol, essentially a question mark. We're asking for permission, not forcing entry." After careful deliberation, they proceeded. Reynolds traced the complete sequence, ending with the question symbol. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like sighing stone, a section at the center of the door, approximately 1 meter in diameter, recessed inward several centimeters and rotated slowly. The heartbeat sound altered dramatically, becoming a complex polyrhythm that made the air itself vibrate. As the central section completed its rotation, it revealed a secondary, smaller door of different material, darker and with a subtle sheen, like oil on water. "Two-factor authentication," Vega murmured. The modern analogy at odds with the ancient technology before them. Reynolds reached toward the inner door, then froze. Along the seam where the outer door had recessed, a viscous red liquid had begun to seep. It pulsed outward with each heartbeat, running in rivulets down the stone face. "Is that—" Harlow began. Vega collected a sample in a sterile vial, his hand trembling slightly. "Yes, it appears to be blood." Morning light filtered through the canopy as Vega hunched over the portable microscope, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. He hadn't slept, transfixed by what the blood sample revealed. "This isn't possible," he muttered, as Reynolds joined him, eyes heavy from his own restless night. "What are we looking at?" Reynolds asked, peering at the display. "Cellular structures unlike anything in the taxonomic record." Vega adjusted the magnification. "They contain both plant and animal characteristics, with a cellular complexity that shouldn't exist naturally. And they're still active, 24 hours after collection." The screen showed organisms moving with apparent purpose, forming and reforming into patterns that matched symbols from the door. "They're communicating," Reynolds realized. "Or trying to." Harlow approached, his complexion ashen despite the tropical heat. For the first time since the expedition began, he appeared truly unsettled. "We need to discuss whether to proceed," he said quietly. Reynolds nodded toward the door. "The bleeding has stopped, but the inner door is clearly designed to be opened next. My translations of the surrounding symbols suggest we're looking at a countdown of some kind." "Countdown to what?" Vega asked, unknown. "But there are repeated references to guardians awakening if the heart chamber is breached." Harlow paced the perimeter of their camp, the inner conflict evident in his demeanor. Finally, he turned to face his colleagues. "There's something I haven't told you," he confessed. 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Inoperable. The doctors gave me less than a year." The revelation hung heavy in the humid air. "This expedition isn't just about archaeological discovery. For me," Harlow continued, "it's about legacy. One final contribution to human knowledge before I'm gone." Vega's expression softened. "James, I'm sorry, but we need to consider the indigenous warnings seriously. Whatever this structure contains, it was sealed away for a reason." Before Harlow could respond, screams erupted from the tent where they'd set up sleeping quarters. They rushed inside to find their security officer, Vega, thrashing violently in his sleeping bag, eyes wide but unseeing. "Watchers in the trees!" he shrieked, clawing at invisible threats. "They see us! They're coming!" It took both Reynolds and Harlow to restrain him until the episode passed. When Vega finally regained coherence, terror lingered in his eyes. "I saw them," he whispered, "watching us through the jungle itself. Not human, not animal, something else." While Vega recovered, Harlow attempted to contact Dr. Chen via satellite. The connection, previously reliable despite their remote location, now produced only bursts of static, interspersed with fragments of words. Unusual patterns. Chen's voice broke through momentarily. "Satellite imagery shows convergence directly above." The transmission died completely, leaving them isolated. When they checked their equipment, they discovered the solar chargers had failed overnight despite clear skies. Battery power would last another day at most. As the day progressed, Reynolds continued his translations, focusing on a segment he'd previously overlooked. The meaning, when it emerged, sent a chill through the camp. "The door isn't a door at all," he announced. "At least not in the sense we understand. The term translates more accurately as containment system or prison wall." Night fell with oppressive speed, as though darkness itself were eager to claim the jungle. During their final perimeter check, they discovered something that defied explanation. Encircling their camp, at precisely 10 meters distance, was an arrangement of stones, hundreds of them, each positioned with mathematical precision to form a complex pattern that mirrored the door's central symbols. "Someone placed these here," Vega said, examining the nearest stone. "Not someone," Reynolds corrected, pointing to the undisturbed ground between the stones. "There are no footprints, no soil disturbance. These stones were arranged without physical contact." As they contemplated this impossibility, Harlow's satellite phone emitted a single tone, not the usual ringtone, but a sound identical to the door's heartbeat. The screen displayed a message unlike any standard communication protocol. "Breach imminent. Guardians activate. Cycle, status, premature." "We're not alone anymore," Reynolds whispered, glancing toward the dark jungle beyond their camp lights. "And whatever's out there, it knows we're here." As their equipment batteries dwindled, Vega made a desperate attempt to access restricted data on their Nexus-provided tablets. His background in computational archaeology, a specialization he'd downplayed when joining the expedition, proved invaluable as he bypassed multiple security protocols. "They never expected us to be without." "Satellite uplink," he explained, fingers dancing across the screen. "The encryption relies on verification through their servers." Reynolds watched anxiously, while Harlow paced, casting frequent glances toward the door. Its heartbeat had developed an arrhythmic pattern since their interaction with the symbols. "I'm in," Vega announced as the tablet screen flickered and reorganized into a classified Nexus interface. "This is... my God!" The tablet projected a holographic display into the air above it, a rotating globe with 7 points marked in pulsing red. One in the Amazon, one beneath Antarctica's ice shelf, another in the Gobi Desert, a fourth deep in the Pacific Ocean, 3 more at remote locations across the planet. "They've found others," Reynolds breathed. "Not just found," Vega said, swiping through files. "They've been studying them for decades under something called threshold theory. According to these reports, they believe the doors are access points to something beyond conventional understanding of reality." He pulled up personnel files showing teams similar to their own, archaeologists, linguists, anthropologists, all listed with the same designation, status, terminated, missing. "They knew the risks," Harlow said quietly. "They sent us here knowing what happened to the others." Reynolds examined the star chart, accompanying the door locations. These configurations match symbols on the door, their astronomical positions, a celestial alignment that occurs once every 26,000 years. "When is the next alignment?" Harlow asked. Reynolds checked the data, then looked up with widened eyes. 3 days from now." Vega had accessed another file, research summaries from Nexus Laboratories. "They've been conducting biotechnology experiments using samples from these sites. Military contracts for what they're calling non-conventional biological defense systems." "Weaponization," Harlow concluded. They want to weaponize whatever biological technology created these structures. The holographic display shifted to show microscopic images of cellular structures identical to those in the door's blood, being cultured, modified, and integrated with human DNA. There's more, Vega said, his voice dropping. According to these records, Nexus didn't discover these sites randomly. They were guided to them by theoretical models developed by you, Harlow. That's impossible, Harlow protested. My research into pre-human architecture only began after my university dismissal. After Nexus approached me, these files date your initial work to 3 years before that. Research conducted under deep sedation during your treatment at New Horizons Medical Center. Harlow staggered backward. I was there for experimental cancer treatments. When conventional methods failed, Nexus owns New Horizons, Vega said quietly. They've been extracting your theories while you were unconscious, then feeding them back to you as original inspiration. The revelation hung heavy in the air as Reynolds made another discovery in the astronomical data. The alignment isn't just cosmetic, he explained, pointing to energy measurement predictions. Nexus believes it creates a quantum resonance between all 7 sites. A synchronized activation, and they've been experimenting at the other sites already, Vega added. Reviewing containment breach protocols in the files, the holographic display suddenly collapsed as the tablet's battery failed. In the silence that followed, they became aware of a new sound, the rhythmic thudding of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. That's impossible, Reynolds said. We're 200 miles from the nearest landing zone. No standard helicopter has that range. Nexus has resources beyond what you imagine, Harlow said grimly, retrieving the satellite phone. The screen remained unchanged, still displaying the cryptic message about Guardians activating. We have a decision to make, Vega said, looking between his colleagues. Do we cooperate with whoever's coming, knowing what Nexus really wants? Or do we find another way? Reynolds glanced toward the jungle's edge, where strange patterns of movement had been visible throughout the day. Not quite human, not quite animal. I'm not convinced Nexus is our biggest concern anymore. The helicopter sounds grew louder as darkness fell completely. In the distance, they could see its searchlight cutting through the canopy, methodically sweeping toward their position. Whatever we decide, Harlow said quietly, we do it together. No more secrets. As if in response to his words, the door's heartbeat suddenly accelerated to a frenzied pace. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble as root systems erupted from the soil, forming intricate patterns that perfectly mirrored the door's central symbols across the entire clearing. The helicopter descended into the clearing, its downdraft bending the surrounding vegetation in unnatural patterns. Unlike standard research craft, this matte black vehicle bore no markings and featured modified weapons mounts along its fuselage. 6 figures in tactical gear disembarked with practiced precision, establishing a perimeter before their apparent leader emerged. Tall and lean with military bearing, he surveyed the scene with cold efficiency. "Dr. Harlow," he called, voice carrying easily over the fading rotor sound. "I'm Commander Reese, Nexus Special Operations. This site is now under Security Protocol 7. Harlow stepped forward, positioning himself between the newcomers and the door. "This is an archaeological expedition, Commander. Your jurisdiction here is questionable at best." Reese's smile never reached his eyes. "I think we both know this is far more than archaeology." The final passenger descended from the helicopter, a woman in her 40s wearing a specialized environmental suit rather than tactical gear. Her gaze locked immediately on the door. "Dr. Eliza Wright," she introduced herself, extending a gloved hand that Harlow reluctantly shook. "Chief Biotechnologist, Nexus Advanced Applications Division." Reese's team had already begun unloading equipment, not the usual archaeological support gear, but sophisticated containment systems and what appeared to be weapons designed for non-human targets. Wright approached the door without hesitation, seemingly untroubled by its pulsating rhythm or the blood that had dried along its seams. "Remarkable preservation," she murmured. Better than Antarctica or Gobi, the biological components remain fully viable. You've been inside the others? Reynolds asked. Wright glanced at him dismissively. Partially. Each presents unique challenges. The Gobi site's biological elements were dormant. Antarctica's were degraded. This one, she pressed a hand against the surface, is perfect. Reese directed his team to set up a sophisticated perimeter of sensors and deterrents while Wright unpacked what looked like scientific equipment. Among these was a sleek cylindrical device that emitted a low-frequency hum when activated. Sonic resonance disruptor, Wright explained, noting their interest. The harmonic patterns these structures generate can interfere with cognitive functions after prolonged exposure. This counteracts those effects. As if to demonstrate, she adjusted a setting on the device. Immediately, the door's audible heartbeat faltered, its rhythm disrupted before resuming at a slower pace. You're interfering with its natural functions, Vega protested. Natural is a relative term, Dr. Vega, Wright replied. These structures are technological artifacts, not geological formations. Created by whom? Reynolds asked. That's classified beyond your clearance, Reese interjected. Dr. Harlow, you'll continue to receive full credit for this discovery. Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Vega will be reassigned to auxiliary research teams after debriefing. Reassigned? Vega echoed. We're not Nexus employees. Your university contracts include contingency clauses for national security priorities, Wright said while calibrating instruments. This site has been designated Critical Priority Alpha. Reynolds noticed that while Wright spoke, Nexus technicians were already preparing what appeared to be cutting equipment, specialized, tools designed to extract samples far larger than what Harlow had. Collected, the door is a containment system, he warned. My translations indicate it's holding something that shouldn't be released. Wright's expression flickered briefly. Your translations confirm our own. What you interpret as warnings, we understand as instructions. She gestured toward the sky. The alignment approaches. This site must be properly prepared. Prepared for what? Harlow demanded. Disclosure is compartmentalized, Reese answered, checking his tactical display. Focus on your assignment, Doctor. As darkness fell, the Nexus team established powerful lights around the perimeter. The jungle beyond remained unnaturally silent, even the constant insect buzz absent. Several team members reported equipment malfunctions near the vegetation line. Reynolds continued his translations away from Wright's scrutiny, focusing on sections she had dismissed. When the meaning crystallized, he discreetly showed his notes to Vega and Harlow. The symbols don't describe a doorway into something, he whispered. They describe containment of something trying to get out. These aren't entrances, they're exit points. Vega glanced toward the Nexus team busily preparing extraction equipment. They don't understand what they're dealing with. Or they do, Harlow said grimly, and that's exactly why they're here. As night deepened, the sonic disruptor's effect on the door weakened. Despite increased power, the heartbeat rhythm steadily accelerated. New bioluminescent patterns appeared across the surface, symbols that hadn't been visible before. Wright studied these with growing excitement, directing her team to document every change. No one seemed to notice that beyond their light perimeter, the jungle itself had begun to move, subtle shifts in vegetation occurring when no eyes were watching, a coordinated patience that felt almost predatory. Dawn never truly arrived. Instead, a twilight gloom hung over the clearing, as unnaturally dense cloud formations spiraled directly above the site. The Nexus team had worked through the night, establishing a sophisticated operational base around the door. The first sign something was wrong came when Private Mercer failed to return from perimeter patrol. His equipment was found 2 hours later, entangled in vines that hadn't been there the previous evening. Probably got lost, Reese said dismissively, but doubled the patrol units anyway. Reynolds watched from the sidelines as Wright's technicians prepared cutting equipment designed to extract samples from the inner door. His concern grew as he noticed subtle changes in the surrounding jungle, movements that occurred just beyond direct observation, and coordinated patience that felt deliberate. The vegetation density has increased overnight, he pointed out to Vega, who was documenting the changes with their remaining functional camera. Not just increased, Vega replied quietly. Look at the pattern. The jungle had formed a near-perfect wall of vegetation around the entire clearing, denser in some areas than others, but unmistakably forming a barrier. When Reese sent a team to clear a secondary landing zone, they returned reporting impossible growth covering the area. We cut a path, and within minutes, it was gone, the security officer reported. The plants are growing faster than we can clear them. Wright dismissed their concerns, accelerating preparations to extract door samples. Her focus remained entirely on the structure, ignoring the increasingly hostile environment surrounding them. During a moment of privacy, Reynolds shared his completed translations with Harlow and Vega. The door isn't just a containment system, it's part of a planetary defense network. These symbols reference seeders and harvest cycles. I believe whatever is contained beyond that door was placed there intentionally, by forces that recognized its danger. Yet Nexus wants to extract it, Vega said. For weapons development, Harlow added grimly. They don't understand what they're dealing with. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden power fluctuation. Across the camp, equipment failed simultaneously as swarms of insects descended on power supplies and electronics. Unlike natural swarms, these moved with obvious coordination, targeting specific systems with precision. Get the countermeasures online, Reese ordered, as his team deployed what looked like electromagnetic pulse generators. The insect attack retreated, but the damage was done. Half their systems were compromised. As technicians worked to restore power, Vega discovered footage from their perimeter cameras showing plants moving with deliberate purpose when humans weren't watching. The jungle itself is responding, he realized. Showing the footage to Harlow and Reynolds, the evidence was undeniable. Vines formed complex patterns mirroring the door's symbols. Root systems emerged and retreated strategically. Even the soil itself seemed to shift, revealing glimpses of a vast mycelial network pulsing with bioluminescence beneath the surface, a living communication system connecting all plant life. Reese's response was immediate and destructive. "Burn a perimeter!" he ordered, and his team deployed flamethrowers to create a charred boundary between the camp and the advancing vegetation. The jungle's reaction was unexpected. As flames consumed the outer plants, those behind released spores that neutralized the fire, microscopic organisms that absorbed heat without burning. It was an adaptive defense that shouldn't have been possible. Wright observed this with scientific detachment, recording readings from the affected areas. Fascinating. The biological defense systems are more advanced than at previous sites. You're not listening, Harlow insisted, his patience finally breaking. This isn't just defense, it's communication. The jungle is trying to prevent what you're doing. The jungle isn't sentient, Dr. Harlow, Wright replied. These are automated biological responses programmed into the ecosystem by the same technology that created the doors. As she spoke, the ground began to tremble. Root systems erupted through the soil throughout the camp, forming intricate patterns that mirrored the door's symbols directly beneath their feet. Equipment toppled as the earth shifted, creating a perfect replica of the door's central pattern across the entire clearing. Still think it's not communicating? Vega challenged, pointing to the mirrored patterns. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Wright's face. Reese, accelerate the extraction timeline. I want samples secured before nightfall. You can't seriously continue after this, Reynolds protested. This is precisely why we continue, Dr. Reynolds, Wright responded. Whatever biological technology can coordinate an entire ecosystem is exactly what Nexus was established to acquire. As the extraction equipment was repositioned, Harlow noticed something Wright and Reese had missed. The patterns formed by the roots were not identical to the door's current symbols. They matched what Reynolds had translated as a warning. The heart awakens. The guardians rise. The cycle begins prematurely. Commander Reese inspected the specialized cutting equipment his team had assembled near the inner door. his expression hardening as he evaluated the deteriorating situation. If extraction fails, we move to contingency plan Delta, he informed Wright, deliberately loud enough for the archaeologists to overhear. We have shaped charges capable of removing the entire structure for transport. Harlow stepped forward immediately. Explosives. You can't be serious. The vibration alone could destabilize the entire system. Your concerns are noted, Doctor, Reese replied coldly. But Nexus priorities supersede archaeological preservation. The confrontation was interrupted when Wright gestured for Harlow to join her near the monitoring equipment. Away from the others, her professional demeanor shifted subtly. I respect your work, James, she said, using his first name with calculated familiarity. Which is why I think you should understand what we're really doing here. She revealed a tablet showing molecular structures. Harlow recognized immediately experimental cancer treatments far beyond current medical capabilities. Nexus isn't just developing weapons, she explained. The biological properties of these doors have applications across multiple fields, including oncological treatments that could help someone with your diagnosis. Harlow's expression betrayed nothing, but his eyes lingered on the treatment protocols. How did you... We've had access to your medical records since before you joined the expedition, Wright admitted. Nexus recruits based on multiple factors. Your terminal diagnosis made you motivated. As they spoke, Reynolds had been surreptitiously examining the door symbols, documenting changes occurring too subtly for the Nexus instruments to detect. His translation revealed something critical, what appeared to be a map embedded within the symbol sequences. These aren't just warnings, he whispered to Vega. They're directions. The door is part of a network, 7 points across the Amazon basin, all connected. Vega had established emergency radio contact with Mateo's village using equipment hidden from the Nexus team. The indigenous elder reported forest spirits, now active throughout the region, entities moving through the jungle that were neither human nor animal. Meanwhile, the Nexus security team members began reporting unusual symptoms, shared nightmares, visual disturbances, and the unsettling sensation of being watched. One officer, Rodriguez, removed his tactical jacket to reveal bioluminescent patterns forming beneath his skin, living symbols that precisely matched those on the door. It's spreading, Reese observed clinically, ordering Rodriguez to quarantine. Right, we need to accelerate extraction. The decision provided the opening Harlow needed. While the team focused on Rodriguez, he quietly disabled key equipment components, using his knowledge of the technology to create failures that would appear natural. Reynolds simultaneously corrupted data files, documenting their most crucial translations, while Vega reprogrammed sensor equipment to provide false readings. Their sabotage might have gone undetected if Wright hadn't returned unexpectedly. Catching Harlow disabling the sonic disruptor, "I'm disappointed, James," she said, signaling security. "I thought you understood the importance of our work." Within minutes, all 3 archaeologists were detained under armed guard, confined to a makeshift containment area away from the door and their equipment. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Reynolds argued as they were secured. "The door isn't technology we can repurpose. It's a prison for something that should remain contained." Wright ignored his warning, focused entirely on the extraction procedure now underway. Using specialized tools, her technicians began removing a core sample from the inner door, a cylinder of the strange material, approximately 10 centimeters in diameter. The moment the sample separated from the main structure, the door's heartbeat accelerated dramatically. More disturbing was the door's response, a visible contraction, as though the structure itself had experienced pain. "It's alive," Vega whispered, watching in horror as blood-like fluid pulsed from the extraction point with each heartbeat. Wright placed the extracted core into a specialized containment unit, her expression triumphant despite the door's obvious distress. The sample continued pulsing in rhythm with the larger structure, maintaining some connection despite physical separation. As darkness fell, the jungle's activity intensified. Temperature around the clearing dropped precipitously. Bioluminescent mist formed at ground level, spreading inward from the vegetation barrier. Plants grew visibly, extending tendrils toward equipment and personnel. Reese surveyed the deteriorating conditions, then made a decision. Site compromised. Prepare for immediate evacuation. We take the sample and essential personnel only. Wright clutched the containment unit possessively. The sample is priority alpha. Everything else is expendable, including us, Harlow said quietly to his colleagues as they watched the preparations. They never intended for anyone from this expedition to return. The evacuation preparations halted abruptly when the helicopter erupted in flames. Not from conventional fire, but from massive tree growth that erupted through the fuselage, splitting metal and electronics as though they were paper. Impossible, Reese breathed, watching their escape route transform into a twisted sculpture of vegetation and machinery. The jungle's assault began in earnest then, a coordinated attack unlike anything in military doctrine. Microscopic spores infiltrated respiratory equipment. Vines moved with serpentine precision to entangle personnel. Indigenous predators emerged from the undergrowth, their behavior synchronized rather than instinctual. Defensive positions. Reese ordered, his training holding despite the surreal nature of their opposition. His remaining team formed a perimeter, deploying specialized countermeasures that seemed designed specifically for this scenario. In the chaos, Harlow managed to free himself and his colleagues. "We need our research," he insisted, moving toward their equipment cache. The clearing had become a battlefield. 4 security team members disappeared in rapid succession, dragged into the undergrowth by forces moving too quickly to track. The survivors maintained discipline, using flamethrowers and sonic disruptors to create a defensive zone around Wright and her precious sample. Reynolds retrieved their critical notes, while Vega salvaged what equipment he could. "The door is communicating with the jungle," Vega theorized, pointing to the synchronized pulses of bioluminescence flowing between the structure and the surrounding vegetation. As the defenders retreated toward the door, the only area the jungle didn't immediately reclaim, Harlow noticed something extraordinary. Where the most concentrated spore clouds formed, human-shaped figures briefly materialized, entities composed entirely of jungle material that could shift between visibility and perfect camouflage at will. They're not attacking randomly, he realized. They're targeting Nexus personnel specifically and the extraction equipment. Wright clutched the containment unit with white-knuckled determination, her scientific detachment finally cracking. "We need to reach the secondary extraction point. Reese, clearance protocol now?" The commander activated a device that emitted a high-frequency pulse, temporarily disrupting the jungle's coordination. In that moment of advantage, the survivors began a strategic withdrawal toward the door clearing. During the retreat, Harlow brushed against a tree trunk covered in bioluminescent spores. The contact triggered an instant neurological connection, his consciousness briefly expanding into the jungle's awareness. For a moment that seemed eternal, he perceived the world through countless sensory inputs simultaneously, from microscopic fungi to ancient trees. The jungle wasn't just alive, it was a single, vast intelligence. When the vision faded, Harlow staggered forward with new understanding. "The spores form a neural network," he explained urgently to Reynolds and Vega. "They're a communication medium, the jungle's nervous system." Reynolds connected this to his translations. "The door isn't separate from the jungle, it's part of it. A biological defense mechanism created to contain something dangerous." The surviving Nexus team had established a defensive position near the door, with Wright protected at the center, still holding the extracted sample. The cylinder pulsed with increasing intensity, resonating with the door's accelerated heartbeat. "The sample is destabilizing," Wright admitted, her scientific curiosity overriding fear. "It's trying to communicate with the parent structure." Vega had been studying the spore patterns, experimenting with thought-directed responses. "The spores react to conscious intention," he demonstrated. causing nearby particles to form simple patterns through concentration alone. If the jungle has consciousness, Reynolds theorized, we might communicate with it directly. Their opportunity came when the most heavily affected security team member, Rodriguez, whose skin now displayed living symbols matching the door's patterns, broke containment. Instead of attacking, he walked directly to the door and placed his hand against its surface. "They're watching us," he said, voice distorted. "They've always been watching." Waiting for the sleeper to complete its cycle. "Who's watching?" Harlow asked. "The Guardians," Rodriguez answered, his eyes reflecting bioluminescent patterns. "They protected this world before humans existed. Before the sleeper was imprisoned." Wright approached cautiously, scientific interest momentarily overriding fear. "What is the sleeper?" "The seed bringer," Rodriguez replied. "The world shaper. It came to transform this planet, but the Guardians contained it until its cycle could complete naturally." Rodriguez's skin pattern shifted suddenly, matching a specific door symbol that Reynolds recognized with alarm. "That's the warning pattern. It means immediate threat." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them trembled violently. The door's heartbeat accelerated to a frantic pace as new symbols illuminated across its surface, patterns that hadn't been visible before. "What's happening?" Reese demanded. "The sample," Harlow realized, pointing to Wright's containment unit. "Removing it has destabilized the entire system." As if confirming his assessment, the inner door began to move for the first time since their arrival, rotating slowly as though an immense lock was being disengaged from within. The inner door's rotation accelerated, ancient mechanisms awakening after millennia of dormancy. Wright's sample pulsed in perfect synchronization despite its physical separation, a phenomenon her instruments recorded with increasing alarm. "Quantum entanglement at a macroscopic scale," she murmured. "Scientific fascination temporarily overriding fear. The sample remains connected to the parent structure regardless of distance." Harlow studied the readings over her shoulder. "It's not just connected, it's identical. Changes in one instantaneously reflect in the other, suggesting non-local consciousness," Reynolds added. "A single entity existing in multiple locations simultaneously." The implications silenced even Reese, whose tactical calculations hadn't accounted for an opponent that transcended physical limitations. Increasingly, severe weather manifested directly above them, electrical. Storms with impossible patterns forming in clouds that spiraled inward like a closing eye. Lightning struck in synchronized sequences that mirrored door symbols, as though the atmosphere itself was responding to the awakening mechanism. "We need to return the sample," Vega urged, watching the deteriorating situation. "It's the only way to restore stability." Wright clutched the containment unit possessively. "This sample represents technology beyond anything in human history. Its applications are limitless. Its applications include the end of everything we know," Reynolds countered, showing her his completed translations of the inner door sequence. "This is counting down to an astronomical alignment 3 days from now. If fully activated before then, the cycle disrupts prematurely." "What cycle?" Wright demanded. "Evolution," Harlow answered quietly, the pieces finally connecting. "The door contains an entity that seeded Earth with life billions of years ago. It's supposed to remain dormant until life here reaches a specific developmental stage." The rotation of the inner door suddenly paused, then reversed direction slightly before continuing. The movement revealed glimpses of what lay beyond, a chamber filled with pulsating, crystalline structures surrounding what appeared to be a suspended animation. System security team members began showing advanced stages of spore infection, veins glowing with bioluminescence beneath their skin. Rodriguez had progressed furthest, his eyes now entirely transformed into reflective orbs that mirrored the door's symbols. "They're coming," he announced in a voice no longer entirely human. The Guardians' approach. Wright's obsession with the sample intensified, her behavior becoming increasingly erratic. "The Guardians are simply another biological defense system we can study and eventually control." She refused to share her ongoing analysis of the sample, retreating to a makeshift workstation where she conducted tests with growing excitement. The cylinder had begun developing crystalline formations at both ends, structures that precisely match patterns visible on the inner door. "It's forming a key," Harlow theorized, observing the crystal growth. The door's biological processes are creating a mechanism for full activation. The storm above intensified, lightning striking with mathematical precision around the clearing's perimeter. Each strike revealed glimpses of the jungle's camouflaged entities, now gathered in silent observation just beyond the light. Vega had established deeper communion with the spore network, receiving fragmented visions of Earth's ancient past. "The Guardians weren't created to protect us from the entity," he revealed. "They were created by it, programmed to ensure its awakening occurs at the right moment in Earth's evolutionary timeline. And that moment isn't now," Reynolds concluded, reviewing astronomical calculations. "My translations indicate the alignment in 3 days creates a quantum resonance between all 7 sites. A synchronized activation." Harlow examined Wright's deteriorating mental state with growing concern. Her fascination with the sample had become an obsession, her notes increasingly disjointed yet brilliant, insights into biological technology beyond current human understanding. "She's being influenced," he warned the others. "The sample is affecting her cognition." As night deepened, the crystalline formations on the sample spontaneously completed their growth, forming a key-like structure with perfect symmetry. Wright stared at it with an expression approaching religious ecstasy. "It's beautiful," she whispered, lifting the container. "The culmination of everything Nexus was created to discover." The remaining security team members were too affected by the spores to maintain discipline. Reese alone seemed resistant, maintaining his military bearing despite the chaos surrounding them. "Final option protocols," he announced grimly, revealing specialized charges designed to destroy rather than extract. "If we can't secure the sample, we ensure no one else can access it either." Before anyone could react, Wright seized the crystalline key and ran toward the inner door, driven by compulsions beyond rational thought. "Wright, stop!" Harlow called, but she was beyond reasoning. "I need to see," she responded, her voice distant. "I need to know what waits inside." As she approached the partially opened inner door, with the key extended before her, the jungle fell completely silent. Even the omnipresent heartbeat paused for a moment, as though holding its breath before an inevitable conclusion. Wright forced the crystalline key into the inner door's central mechanism, despite Harlow's desperate attempt to stop her. A blinding pulse of energy radiated outward as lock and key merged, knocking everyone backward with concussive force. Wright wasn't thrown back. She simply ceased to exist. Where she had stood remained only a fine mist of organic particles that hung suspended in the air before being absorbed into the door's surface. As the inner chamber opened fully, reality itself seemed to waver. The air rippled with visible distortions, creating prismatic effects as light bent around a central anomaly. Within the chamber, suspended in a crystalline matrix, floated what appeared to be a humanoid figure, though its proportions and structure defied conventional anatomy. "My God," Harlow whispered, staring at what could only be described as a being in suspended animation. The entity remained motionless, but its containment field pulsed with increasing intensity. Each pulse distorted nearby space-time. Gravity fluctuated unpredictably. Objects aged or reversed at random. Matter temporarily transformed into unfamiliar states before returning to normal. The jungle outside the clearing fell completely silent as all wildlife activity ceased. Even the omnipresent insect buzz vanished, replaced by an expectant stillness that felt almost reverent. From the jungle's edge emerged new figures, humanoid forms composed entirely of plant matter, moving with fluid grace despite their impossible biology. Unlike the camouflaged entities that had attacked earlier, these made no attempt to hide their nature. Their bodies incorporated flowering plants, woody structures, and bioluminescent fungi arranged in anatomical approximations of human form. Guardians, Reynolds breathed, recognizing them from his translations. The botanical entities ignored the humans, forming a perfect circle around the door and beginning a rhythmic swaying movement. Their bodies pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns seen on the door and in the spore networks. Reese, his tactical mind still functioning despite the impossible scenario, interpreted their movement as a threat. Neutralize them, he ordered his remaining security team. Gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through the plant beings with minimal effect. Damaged tissue regenerated almost instantly. The Guardians, continuing their ritual without acknowledging the attack, enraged, Reese deployed his final countermeasure, incendiary rounds that ignited on impact. Still, the Guardians didn't retaliate directly. Instead, vines erupted from the ground, gently but firmly immobilizing the security team without causing injury. They're not trying to hurt us, Vega realized. They're performing a containment ritual. Reynolds translated their movements, recognizing patterns from the door symbols. They're trying to reseal what Wright has partially awakened. Within the crystalline chamber, the suspended entity showed its first signs of movement, subtle shifts that caused profound reality distortions in their vicinity. Objects near the doorway experienced time at different rates. Gravity reversed in localized pockets. Matter transformed temporarily into unfamiliar states of existence. Harlow, drawn by scientific curiosity despite the danger, approached one of the Guardians. As he neared, the being extended what approximated a hand, a complex arrangement of vines and flowering structures. Without fully understanding why, Harlow touched it. The contact established immediate neural connection, far deeper than his previous experience with the spores. Information flooded his consciousness, not as language, but as direct experiential knowledge. Images, sensations, and concepts beyond human understanding temporarily rewired his brain to accommodate alien thought patterns. When the connection broke, Harlow staggered backward, his expression transformed by what he'd witnessed. "They're not what we thought," he gasped. The Guardians weren't created to protect us from the entity. They were created by the ancients to prevent the entity from awakening before its cycle completes. What ancients? Reynolds asked. The first intelligent species to evolve on Earth, Harlow explained, the knowledge feeling both foreign and intimately familiar. They existed billions of years ago, long before humans. They encountered the Cedars, the entities sleeping behind these doors, and recognized their purpose. In the crystalline chamber, the suspended being's movement became more pronounced. Its form shifted between states of matter, never fully resolving into a single definable shape. As it stirred, the fabric of reality around it buckled and warped. "What is it trying to do?" Vega asked, watching in horrified fascination. "Transform," Harlow answered, the Guardian's knowledge still flowing through him. Earth was seeded as part of a cosmic cycle of life propagation. The entity's awakening triggers rapid evolution of all planetary life, a metamorphosis of the entire biosphere. But it's happening too soon, Reynolds realized, connecting this to his translations. The alignment in 3 days is when it should naturally awaken. This premature activation is causing the instability. The entity's movements accelerated, causing increasingly severe reality distortions. Through the open doorway, they glimpsed what awaited beyond the crystal structure, a universe of impossible geometries and shifting biological forms. Both terrifying and beautiful in its alien complexity, the entity emerged partially from its crystalline cocoon, a being of impossible geometry and shifting biological forms. Its body appeared simultaneously solid, liquid, and gaseous, reconfiguring itself moment by moment as it adapted to physical reality. Time distortion intensified around the door site. Moments stretched or compressed unpredictably. In the spaces between seconds, temporal echoes manifested, translucent visions of the clearing as it existed in different time periods. They glimpsed ancient forests, prehistoric seas, and potential futures where the jungle transformed into unrecognizable biological configurations. The entity's first attempt at communication devastated the minds of those nearest. Reese collapsed instantly, blood streaming from his eyes and ears, his consciousness shattered by contact with something his brain had no framework to process. Two remaining security officers fell into catatonia, their minds simply shutting down rather than processing the incomprehensible. Reynolds, his linguist's brain, more adaptable to novel communication systems, managed to remain conscious despite the neural assault. Instinctively, he began translating not words, but conceptual patterns, finding connections between the entity's thought structures and human understanding. "It's trying to communicate," he gasped, his nose bleeding from the effort. But its consciousness operates on too many simultaneous layers for direct comprehension. Using his understanding of the door symbols as a Rosetta Stone, Reynolds established limited communication with the being. The entity responded by modulating its neural broadcasts, reducing them to patterns human minds could partially comprehend. "It calls itself a seeder," Reynolds translated, the words inadequate for the vast concepts they represented. Ancient beings who initiated life on countless worlds. Through fragmented images and sensations, they understood that Earth had been planted billions of years ago, one of thousands of worlds seeded with specific genetic templates designed to evolve along predetermined paths. Not malevolent, Reynolds struggled to explain as information flooded his mind, but operating on incomprehensible timescales and purposes. Its awakening is premature, triggered by human interference rather than natural cosmic cycles. The Guardians continued their containment ritual, their movements growing more urgent as the entity's influence expanded. Where the being's presence touched the physical world, matter transformed, ordinary plants evolving into hybrid life forms with impossible characteristics. A fallen leaf became a luminous insect-plant hybrid. A puddle of rainwater developed simple neural structures. Demonstrations, Harlow realized, watching these transformations. It's showing us its purpose, accelerated evolution. Vega had established deeper connection with the jungle consciousness, learning it had evolved specifically to contain the entity until the proper time. The original containment was created by the ancients, the first sentient species on Earth, but they knew they wouldn't survive to monitor it eternally. So they engineered the jungle itself as a living guardian system. The entity's partial emergence caused expanding waves of reality distortion. Harlow experienced a direct vision transmitted by the being, Earth's potential future, if the entity fully awakened now. He witnessed rapid, uncontrolled evolution of all planetary life, transforming ecosystems into alien landscapes within days. Humanity survived, but was fundamentally altered, forced to evolve alongside all other life into forms barely recognizable as human. When the vision ended, Harlow found himself weeping without knowing why. The future he'd glimpsed was neither apocalyptic nor utopian, simply profoundly different in ways his mind struggled to encompass. Reynolds had continued analyzing the door symbols during these events, focusing on sections previously deemed irrelevant. His expression changed as understanding dawned. "There's a fail-safe mechanism," he announced, pointing to a specific symbol sequence. "A way to force the entity back into dormancy until the proper alignment." The entity sensed this discovery. The chamber vibrated as reality itself seemed to protest, localized space-time breaking down around them. Objects phased in and out of existence. Gravity reversed temporarily. Causality itself became unreliable as effects preceded causes. "It's not attacking us," Vega realized, observing the patterns. "These are defense mechanisms, automatic responses to perceived threats to its awakening." Harlow studied the failsafe Reynolds had identified. This sequence requires synchronized activation at all 7 sites. A global containment system that needs coordinated effort. through the temporal echoes surrounding them. They glimpsed other sites across the Amazon, 6 more doors with their own guardians, their own localized anomalies. At each location, indigenous protectors performed rituals mirroring those of the guardians surrounding them. "The network is still active," Reynolds said with dawning hope. "The other sites are responding to what's happening here." The entity's partial manifestation intensified, its form becoming more defined as it adapted to physical reality. As it gained coherence, its thoughts became more focused and more comprehensible to human minds. It communicated not in language, but in pure concept. A message simultaneously conveyed to all present: "I am the beginning. The cycle continues. Too soon. Containment required." "It knows," Harlow said with astonishment. "It understands it's awakening prematurely. It's trying to help us contain it again." With the entity partially manifested and reality fluctuating around them, the survivors gathered at the edge of the distortion field to determine their course of action. "We have 2 options," Reynolds explained, clutching his translations. "Help the Guardians reinforce containment or," he hesitated, "allow the awakening to proceed." Harlow studied the entity with conflicted fascination. The scientific value of contact with a being that seeded life itself could come at the cost of everything we know, Vega interrupted. "You saw the projections. Uncontrolled evolution would transform all life on Earth within days. Their debate was interrupted when crystalline formations spontaneously grew from the ground around them, translucent structures that pulsed with the same rhythm as the door. When Vega accidentally touched one, his consciousness immediately expanded beyond the clearing. "I can see the other sites," he gasped, maintaining contact with the crystal. "Indigenous guardians at each location. They're performing containment rituals." Reynolds and Harlow each touched different crystals, experiencing the same expanded awareness. Through this network, they could perceive all 7 door locations simultaneously, communicating instantly with the human and guardian protectors at each site. "It's a communication system," Reynolds realized. "The doors were never isolated. They've always been connected through these consciousness transfer nodes." The entity's presence intensified, causing further reality distortions as it adapted to physical existence. It projected conceptual images directly into their minds, revealing cosmic context that transcended language. They witnessed the entity's species' ancient conflict with another cosmic race, how they used seeded planets as resource worlds in a universe-spanning competition. Earth had been just one of countless worlds planted with specific genetic templates, intended for eventual harvesting, when life reached optimal development. But something unexpected had happened on Earth. The indigenous guardians communicated through the crystal network that Earth had developed. Consciousness beyond its intended design, evolving unique characteristics that made it resistant to the standard harvesting process. "The entity is offering you something, Harlow," Vega said suddenly, receiving the communication through his crystal. "It senses your cellular degradation." The entity projected a specific genetic sequence into Harlow's mind, a reconfiguration that would repair his cancer at the molecular level. The offer was clear: assist the entity's full awakening in exchange for personal salvation. Harlow's expression revealed his temptation. After a lifetime pursuing archaeological truth, he stood before the ultimate confirmation of his theories, and it offered to save him from his terminal diagnosis. Meanwhile, the remaining Nexus security team members, now heavily influenced by the entity's presence, became increasingly hostile. Their eyes glowed with bioluminescence as they moved to destroy the crystals and guardian ritual stones. "They're completely under its influence," Reynolds warned as Reese, barely conscious but driven by programming rather than will, activated a dead man's switch connected to explosive charges around the door. Vega had established full network communication with all 7 sites, coordinating with other indigenous protectors. "We can still contain it," he insisted. "All 7 sites are active and responding. Through the crystal network, They received a critical insight from a remote guardian. The entity's neural structure had been fundamentally altered by its premature partial awakening. If forced back into containment now, it would experience the equivalent of eternal torment, conscious but unable to fully awaken or return to true dormancy. "There's a moral dimension we hadn't considered," Reynolds said quietly. The entity, sensing their hesitation, projected a third option, a controlled, gradual awakening that would extend the evolutionary process over decades rather than days, allowing adaptation rather than shocking transformation. Time distortions worsened. Team members experienced moments from past and potential futures simultaneously. Through these glimpses, Harlow witnessed contradictory outcomes. Earth transformed beyond recognition in some, preserved but fundamentally changed in others, destroyed completely in a few. "We need to decide," Vega urged as Reese's explosives armed with an ominous beeping. "The containment window is closing." Reynolds calculated the ritual requirements, translating the precise timing needed at all 7 sites. Synchronization is essential. Every location must perform identical actions at exactly the same moment. As they debated, the entity projected one final communication directly to Harlow, an image of himself transformed, cancer-free, guiding humanity through the coming changes as Earth evolved according to the cosmic plan. Harlow closed his eyes, weighing personal survival against potential cosmic consequences. His lifetime of scientific pursuit had led to this impossible choice between knowledge and safety, personal redemption and global stability. "I've spent my career searching for humanity's true origins," he said finally, opening his eyes with newfound resolve. "But some truths aren't meant to be rushed." Harlow's decision galvanized the team into action. Through the Crystal Network, they coordinated with protectors at the other 6 sites, establishing a unified containment protocol based on Reynolds' translations. "The ritual requires precise timing," Reynolds explained, directing specific symbol sequences to each location. All 7 sites must perform identical actions at exactly the same moment. Vega worked with the Guardians, who arranged themselves in complex geometric patterns around the door. Their plant-based bodies pulsed with intensifying bioluminescence as they established harmonic resonance between sites. "The technology is biological," Harlow observed, modifying their remaining equipment to amplify the ritual's effect. "But it follows principles we can measure and enhance." The entity's resistance intensified as it sensed their intentions. Reality fractured around them, showing glimpses of alternate worlds where the containment failed, planets transformed beyond recognition, life evolving along paths never intended by nature. "It's showing us possibilities," Vega realized, "futures where it successfully awakened." The security team members under the entity's influence made a final, desperate assault. Reese, barely conscious but driven by some deeper programming, lunged for the detonator controlling the explosives around the door. "If we lose containment, it ends here," he growled, his eyes reflecting alien patterns. Harlow intercepted him, the 2 men struggling at the edge of the reality distortion field. "You don't understand what you're doing," Harlow shouted. "The explosives won't destroy it, they'll only release it completely." In the struggle, both men fell partially into the field. Reese screamed as his body experienced multiple timelines simultaneously, aging, de-aging, transforming in waves of biological flux. Harlow pulled back just in time, dragging Reese clear but sustaining burns where reality itself had seared his skin. Through the Crystal Network, the Guardians began the final ritual, creating a temporal synchronization field that aligned all 7 sites in a single moment of unified time. Normal space-time limitations fell away as each location existed simultaneously within a unified field of containment energy. "The alignment is stabilizing," Reynolds reported, monitoring the symbols that flowed across the door's surface like living calligraphy. "But something's wrong. The pattern is incomplete." The Guardians communicated the problem. Right's interference with the natural system had created an imbalance. The ritual now required direct human participation to complete. Someone has to physically connect with the entity during containment, Vega translated from the Guardian signals. To complete the circuit, the implications hung heavy in the air. Whoever made that connection would be caught between dimensions as the entity was forced back into its chrysalis state, neither fully in this world nor entirely gone from it. "I'll do it," Harlow said without hesitation. "My cancer gives me months at best. This gives my end meaning." Reynolds gripped his colleague's shoulder. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Harlow replied with calm certainty. "And we both know it. Across all 7 sites, the synchronized ritual reached its crescendo. Energy fields manifested as visible light, connecting each door in a network visible from space, a perfect heptagon of power with Earth at its center. The entity fought containment, projecting increasingly desperate offers and threats. It showed Harlow visions of cosmic history, the Cedars' origins, their eternal conflict with opposing forces, the true purpose behind Earth's creation. In these visions, Harlow glimpsed something the entity hadn't intended to reveal, a fundamental truth about consciousness itself. The Cedars hadn't created life. They had merely shaped it along specific paths. The spark that made life more than mere chemistry had come from somewhere deeper, beyond even the Cedars' understanding. The critical moment arrived. The ritual faltered at the precise point where human intention needed to connect with Guardian technology. "Now, Harlow," Reynolds called as the temporal synchronization reached maximum stability. Harlow stepped forward, every movement deliberate as he approached the partially manifested entity. Its form shifted between states of being, sometimes appearing almost human, other times completely alien. Occasionally, a mathematical abstraction given temporary substance. "I've spent my life searching for humanity's origins," Harlow said as he reached toward the crystalline structure. "How fitting to end it by protecting humanity's future." His hand touched the pulsing core, where the entity was anchored to physical reality. Blinding light erupted as Harlow became the conduit for the ritual's energy. His body, the final component in the ancient containment system, the entity began rapid regression, its manifestation collapsing inward as the containment reasserted itself. As it retreated, it transmitted one final message directly into Harlow's consciousness, not a threat, but a recognition, an acknowledgement that Earth had developed something unexpected, something worth preserving until the proper time. The inner door began to close, reality stabilizing as the entity returned to dormancy. The last thing Reynolds and Vega saw was Harlow's expression, not of pain, but of profound understanding as he and the entity disappeared together into the sealing chamber. 3 days after containment, the door stood silent, its heartbeat rhythm now barely perceptible. The inner chamber had resealed with new, stronger safeguards, crystalline formations growing across its surface like organic locks. Reynolds and Vega recovered slowly from their ordeal, changed fundamentally by their experience. The jungle around them had retreated to its natural boundaries, though areas near the door remained unusually vibrant. Where Harlow had disappeared, strange orchids now bloomed, a hybrid species never before documented. Their genetic structure containing complex information patterns. The Guardians maintained a visible presence at the perimeter, no longer hostile but watchful, continuing their ancient vigil with renewed purpose. "What do we tell the outside world?" Vega asked as they gathered their surviving research and prepared to leave. Reynolds considered carefully. "A limited, carefully worded truth, an archaeological discovery of significant cultural importance, protected by local indigenous groups. Nothing about entities from beyond the stars seeding life on Earth. Nothing that would bring more Nexus teams or government agencies searching for weapons technology. Reynolds clarified. The surviving Nexus personnel had been escorted from the Amazon by indigenous groups that materialized from the jungle once containment was complete. Without Wright's leadership or Reese's military discipline, they offered no resistance. As Reynolds packed the last of their equipment, he discovered a weathered leather journal hidden beneath Harlow's sleeping bag. Opening it revealed meticulous notes in Harlow's distinctive handwriting, observations and insights recorded throughout the expedition, continuing to the final moments before containment. The last entry was dated after Harlow's apparent sacrifice. I exist between states now, neither fully here nor entirely gone. The entity and I have reached an understanding, mutual containment until the proper time. I perceive reality differently, across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The door was never merely a prison, but a chrysalis. What sleeps here isn't meant to destroy humanity, but to guide its next evolution when both are ready. The Guardians understand this now. They protect not against the entity, but against premature contact. I will continue my work from this new perspective, watching over the containment, learning what the Cedars knew. There are more doors than we realized, on worlds beyond our own. Life finds its way again and again throughout the cosmos. Satellite connection re-established the next day, allowing their first contact with Dr. Chen since the ordeal began. Her face, on the video feed, showed mixture of relief and confusion. We lost all contact for 5 days, she explained. During that time, unusual phenomena were recorded worldwide. Gravitational anomalies, aurora-like lights visible even at the equator, unexplained power fluctuations. What happened out there? Reynolds and Vega exchanged glances, silently agreeing on their response. We found evidence of an advanced pre-Columbian civilization, Reynolds answered carefully, with unique architectural and astronomical knowledge. Dr. Harlow remained at the site with indigenous researchers to continue documentation. It wasn't entirely false. Over subsequent weeks, Nexus publicly disavowed knowledge of the expedition after evidence of similar containment events emerged worldwide. Anonymous whistleblowers released files showing the corporation had been pursuing biological weapons development under archaeological cover. Reynolds established a foundation to monitor the doors, working closely with indigenous guardians at each site. Their primary mission, ensuring no one interfered with the containment systems before the natural completion of what they now understood was a cosmic cycle. Vega became liaison between scientific communities and the newly awakened jungle consciousness, documenting how the ecosystem had been fundamentally altered by contact with the entity. Plant species near the door exhibited accelerated evolution, not dangerous, but scientifically revolutionary, offering insights into biological processes that would transform medicine and agriculture. 1 year after containment, Reynolds completed his translation of the door's full warning, a cosmic calendar predicting when the entity would naturally complete its cycle. The date was still distant, over 4 centuries in humanity's future. More puzzling were the new symbols that occasionally appeared on the door's surface, messages that hadn't been there during their expedition. When translated, they contained scientific insights and philosophical observations that could only have come from Harlow. The final evidence came when indigenous children playing near the door reported conversations with a man who appeared briefly in the jungle before fading from view, a weathered archaeologist who told them stories about ancient civilizations and stars beyond counting. Years later, a new expedition team arrived, equipped with advanced technology, to study the door from a respectful distance. They were met at the perimeter by indigenous guardians and an unusual phenomenon, a pattern of flowering plants that grew spontaneously to spell out a welcome message. The message was signed, James Harlow, Guardian of the Threshold. The expedition leader looked around in confusion. Who's James Harlow? The indigenous guide smiled knowingly. The man who walks between worlds. He says the door will remain sealed until we are ready to meet what waits beyond. Until then, he watches, he learns, he remembers. In the clearing center, the door continued its patient heartbeat, waiting for the day when humanity and the sleeper would be ready for their inevitable reunion.